Welcome to the Parenting with Impact podcast with your hosts Elaine Taylor-Klaus and Diane Dempster, co-creators of ImpactParents.com, an online community, award-winning blog, and service organization helping parents all over the world to raise complex kids become capable, independent adults. Elaine and Diane are certified coaches with personal experience raising children with challenges such as ADHD, anxiety, and more, and extensive experience in guiding parents to raise their complex kids with confidence and calm. On the podcast, Elaine and Diane interview experts, bringing you cutting-edge information about your child's challenges, teach you real-life strategies to create lasting change, and demonstrate how coaching can guide you to parent your complex kids, one conversation at a time. For the essentials of Elaine and Diane's coach approach to parenting, download a free tip sheet at impactparents.com/podcast.
So we're really excited today to welcome a new friend and colleague to us, George Sachs. George, we're so thrilled to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
So George comes with lots of qualifications and credentials. He's a child psychologist. He specializes in the treatment of ADHD and autism spectrum disorders in children, teen, and adults. He's got lots of Gestalt training and all kinds of other expertise. And he's here with us because we met him because he's working and collaborating with a group of other professionals to create a new mobile app for people with ADHD to really help them use their full potential by using the principles of CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, which is a really effective modality for working with people with ADD, very, very similar in our experience to the work we do as coaches. And so we're really excited. We've had a great time beginning to collaborate with them and really participating by adding some content to this new app they're creating. So, George, welcome. We're thrilled to have you. And let's step into a new conversation.
Well, George,
Absolutely.
If you could start by telling us a little bit about what you do with families of complex kids and how you came to start doing this work.
Well, I was a complex kid, so let's start there, I think. But more of the spacey, inattentive type of ADHD. So I went under the radar in school and made grades that were good enough. But fortunately, my parents were not, this was in the 80s, 70s and 80s where they, the report card came out once a year, maybe twice a year. And I never, ever remember any lectures or discussions about grades. I think they were like C's and B's. So I really appreciate looking back on that because I don't think I could have done better. And I say that in parentheses, I don't think I wanted to do better.
Yeah, my son would say the same thing.
But I was excelling in all sorts of other things, like just creative projects and sports and making friends. And I had a really nice childhood and have a great relationship with my parents in their 80s because I think of this time in my life where and the other challenge I had was a older sister who was very bright naturally and had good executive functioning and went on to University of Chicago and a younger brother who was very bright with great, excellent executive functioning and went on to Brown University. So in theory, I could have, I, of course, internalized my own, like, am I smart enough? I'm not, what about me, But that's not really one of my issues. And I really have to thank my parents for that because they allowed me to be, to do what I was going to do naturally and to support those different things and to never really emphasize, like, grades for me.
Yeah.
And they didn't emphasize grades interestingly, they never emphasized grades for my sister and brother. That was all innate, like desire for them and interests. And I think that's just so important. You could call it free range parenting, but I just think that does a disservice to them, because they probably thought about this. Like, this child does not really show a lot of interest in school and he's getting C's and B's. So, but you know what? He's happy and we're happy. So let's just let it be. Did you ever
ask them?
I haven't. I'm thinking out loud now that I should ask them, but I am grateful for that because I don't have any feeling like I'm not as smart as, I have different talents than they do.
Well, and
that was,
clearly you have those talents though, because you circled around and went back and got a PhD, and you have a doctor in front of your name now. So something shifted for you.
well, age. So yeah, so then I went to high school and college and was not a stellar student at, and then it took me 10 years to really get back to finding my passion. And that was graduate school, but I was 32. And at that point, I think there was a lot of motivation and fear, like this is kind of the thing. People say, well, fear is not a great motivator, but I think it is a good motivator in some cases when I had tried a lot of other things and then realized like whatever I was trying in my 20s wasn't really working. It wasn't suited for me, but going back to school, I did well because I wanted to do well. And so to answer the original question, I love working with kids, and in the process of studying child psychology, you have to focus on ADHD because it's such a big issue. And I was doing some of the self-reports or parent reports on kids and realizing like, this was me. This was exactly, me.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I realized I had ADHD, and it was always underreported. But again, I never feel like, oh, I wish I had been diagnosed, because you know what? I just don't know what could have been different, and I think this is an interesting topic. It's like sometimes I did learn this in graduate school. I remember a class that even psychotherapy can have negative consequences, like just, commuting to the therapist or the costs of the therapist or feeling negative feelings. But I think we have to acknowledge that same thing with children when we, diagnose them and then treat them. It can have negative consequences in some ways. So it's important to think about both the positive and negative and weighing all these, because I think some parents rush into like, I need this, this, and this, and this to help him because they have ADHD. But parents say, well, he needs therapy, and I say, well, why? Why does he need therapy? Does he have emotional, or I'd say he, but he or she have emotional issues? Because then they would need therapy. Are they feeling bullied or isolated or ostracized, or are they angry? No, they just have a hard time focusing. Okay, well then why don't you spend the money on parenting classes instead of individual therapy classes? I always recommend parent coaching or parent training, because I say this child you need like a master's degree in parenting, and that's where the efforts needs to go, as opposed to individual CBT training for a child, an 8-year-old. Well, can't you help him focus? Well, why don't we start with asking you to meditate? If you can meditate every day for 20 minutes, then we'll have expectations that your child will be able to focus better.
Well, so George,
music to my ears, I got to say.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so what I want to take us back to, because it sounds like your experience as a kid, where your parents just kind of let you be who you are on some level, and you kind of evolve in a way, is really key to how you are focused on helping families. How does that actually translate into a message for parents of complex kids?
Well, a lot of it is, as you know, is anxiety, not with the child, but with the parent. And what does this mean? Oh my God, my child has ADHD. Oh my God, what do we need? I've just read this book. Their whole life is ruined. So a lot of it is managing the anxiety that the child's going to be fine if you don't make it worse, if you just allow the child, because generally the child has other interests, and that's not necessarily just video games. It could be like, I'm working with this child now who's 15, and the parents are like, he's got to get A's. But meanwhile, he's, trading cryptocurrencies, and what was the other thing he was doing? And all sorts of cool stuff that, somebody would think, well, this is a distraction. But what I tell the parent is like, look, are they going to use biology in 10 years? Probably not. But all these things that they are passionate about will translate into, will definitely translate into some successful career. So this child may be very successful on Wall Street or doing something like that. So I think if we allow the child to pursue that with ADHD, to pursue their passions, and I say this, at the expense of their grades, then I think the child will actually be more successful.
I couldn't agree with you more. There's so many different directions I feel like I could go in this conversation with you. And the one that's coming up, which I kind of don't want to go through, but I think I need to, is one of the number one things we hear from parents right now is, yeah, but the only thing they care about is the screen, is the technology. And, having this conversation of, well, maybe that is their future career in some way is not consoling to them, I find. So what about that? About the kids who really are hyper-focused on a screen to the extent of the rest of their life?
Okay, well, when I grew up, we at the very beginning of video games like Pong. I remember Pong and Space Invaders, and we never had a console or anything like that. But when I started in my early 40s, when I started really doing private practice with kids and teens, and that's what they were talking about, I went out and bought myself, because I remember one child was into Pokemon, and he was talking about Pokemon, and I read something online about Pokemon, and he looked at me. This child had autism. So he looked at me and he goes, "You don't know anything about Pokemon." And so he caught me. And then I said, you know what? He's absolutely right. I'm going to go learn as much as I can by playing these video games. So I bought what was it back then? I played Pokemon. I forget the device it was.
Game Boy, probably a Game Boy.
It was the next evolution of that. I forget, between that and the Switch, which I bought, and I bought the PlayStation, and I started actually liking a lot of these games, so I could communicate with particularly the boys, although some girls play. But one thing that's important to know about the video games is that they are really a community and a social device, because nowadays you can really chat with other people, friends, and a group of friends will say, let's get on this together. And for boys, I think it's important to be doing something while they're connecting. I think girls are a little bit different, but I think because of the biology of the male, if they're just sitting talking, it's uncomfortable. So I say to the parent, look, these games, you need limits, So I do support limits, and that might be no video games on the weekdays, or, maybe on Friday they can start. So I think limits is very important. You can't just let your kid do whatever they want with the video games, because they're built to be addictive, with the reward systems and the leveling up. It's very hard to stop yourself, particularly if you're shy and you're not going out into the world. So the video games can be attractive. So I think it is the parental role to set limits on the screen time, but that doesn't mean, 1 hour a month. I think they can play 3 hours or 2 hours on the weekend, on Saturday, and another 2 hours on Sunday. And,
I'm guessing that there's probably not a rule of thumb for every family, but what you're saying is that the parents need to play a role in terms of creating a boundary. And I'm going to take you back to kind of this concept of letting kids be who they are. And part of that is playing, and part of that is connecting with their friends and all of those other things. And so I want to take you back to your comment about pursuing their passions. And I think parents are curious, how do I inspire that in my kids? My kids, especially, it's like my kid just wants to do video games, but...
Or with an ADD kid, they try this for 3 weeks, and then that for 3 weeks, and then that for a week. And, so there's oftentimes it takes them a long time to find something that they're really passionate about as well.
Well, I think this is the parental role to introduce, and you can use the video games as a way to say, okay, you can play 2 hours on Saturday, but, you need some exercise. So here are the choices. Tennis, some kids with ADHD prefer more individual sports like tennis or
karate.
Karate, judo. I actually recommend judo over karate. This is a sidebar, but judo, if you can find one in your neighborhood, you actually grab the other child. The two children grab each other and try to move each other. And that's going to be a little bit more satisfying for a child with ADHD than just doing forms, which is what they do in karate or taekwondo. Some taekwondo and karate places, they fight each other, but judo has no punching.
Just so you know, I grew up doing judo, and my dad was a black belt in judo, so you have just validated his whole parenting experience. Thank you.
But I do think it's important to find activities, and if the child moves from one thing to another thing, I say to myself, okay, that's fine, but are they doing that because of a fear of failure, or like they can't do it? And this is the value of like martial arts or team sports or things, because with martial arts, you have to stick with it to get to the next level. So there is motivation. Something like a musical instrument, it's hard to really like know when do I get better, So I think finding things where there's some benchmark of success so they can immediately, when you join judo or martial art, you get the white belt or the yellow belt. And that's an immediate sign of success for a child, and then they can get the next belt. So I think those kind of activities where there's signs of success that the child can feel, particularly if a child doesn't have confidence, are really important. But I do think a parent needs to expose kids to different things, and they don't have to find, that's another thing, parents. And I understand that there's pressure. Parents feel tremendous pressure from peers and social media. Like my kid has to be like a master something so they can get into college, particularly about college. But there's a lot of pressure that a child like master something, and never give up. But I don't remember anything like that of my childhood. I don't know. It seems to be a new phenomenon. Like you have to have 10,000 hours of piano or something like that. I mean, I did Little League and all the other kids in the neighborhood did Little League. And then you know what I mean? I don't remember.
I totally know what you mean. I'm just laughing because I've gone through the experience as a kid and then as a parent to a kid. And, my deal was if you make a commitment to do it for this term, then you got to complete your commitment. But if you don't want to stick with it after that, you don't have to, and so there was always this negotiation with, 3 kids with different interests. But I hear what you're saying. Mastery was never really high on my list. I just wanted them to stick
follow
with something,
Yeah.
Well,
but I'm not in New York City, so it's a different environment.
I don't know if the Cub Scouts or Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or whatever is still popular, but that's another thing. Like you get the badges and then you want to get the next badge. So there's motivation to continue after one semester.
So let's shift to, because I love the way that you're looking at this and this notion of let's let kids have a childhood, let them be kids. Yeah. So what do you think it's important for parents to understand better about their kids? What is it parents are missing?
It's a very good question. I think a couple things, not in any order. I think one of the things, well, I'm in New York City, so maybe it's skewed, but I think what's missing is that children need downtime, and school is not downtime. So, imagine coming home from work. I tell parents at 6 p.m., and then you have like 2 more hours of work, plus all the chores, like actual work. And then you have somebody telling your boss calling you and saying, did you do the work? It would just be horrible. And that's what children experience. I just think kids need a lot of downtime, and downtime means just rolling around, literally, to decompress, but also to be creative and think about, oh, that would be cool to do that, and pursue their interests. You have to kind of do nothing to find something.
Well, and what's coming up for me,
George, do nothing
George,
to find something. I just want to capture that quote.
Yeah. But then what's coming up for me is a lot of parents even have this vision of what downtime is supposed to look like, right? It's just sort of the kid wants to do this, but mom's like, no, this is the way we relax. We relax by going for a walk, or we relax by going, it's just sort of, we're almost even controlling what relaxation looks like.
Yeah. So that's one thing, like downtime. And then it depends on the developmental age, but like peers are so important, friendships, everything revolves around friendships starting in, 8th, 7th grade, 6th grade, and how important friends are. And that's like, well, you can't play video games. Well, this is my entire world, So basically you're saying I'm excommunicated from my friend group if I can't play the video game. So, well, why is that so important you play video games? Well, you don't get it. It's all about the friends, and how precarious friendships are, and, on a kind of razor's edge of like, if I don't, I had another client who was a high school kid, and he had to stay up till 2 a.m. to chat because all the other kids were chatting, and if he didn't chat with them, then he feared he would be outside his friend group, but it was impacting his life in sleep. So I think that's a big thing.
So what's your guidance for that kid or for that kid's parents? How do you, because this is one of the things we see is, kids are not sleeping or not getting anywhere near sufficient sleep. And as the mom, I've raised 3 teenagers all the way through to young adulthood. I know that they're never going to get the amount of sleep I think they should.
You think they should, right?
Right.
Yeah.
But what's the trade-off, right? How do you handle that?
This boy, the goal of the work was really to ask him if he actually wanted the friend group, which is a really important thing. Like, do you enjoy the chatting? I mean, there can be with ADHD, there was rejection sensitivity and the fear, like, I'm not going to fit in. And so there's a clinginess to like this group. Well, but have you even asked if you like the group? And then over time, he realized he actually didn't really like chatting with them. And so he, on his own, was able to make a decision about that. But I think as a parent, it's important to just be aware why the child is on the phone all the time. They're not like checking out CNN. Like everything is about their peer group and their status in the peer group.
And sometimes they have social connections with kids they've never met because of the technology, which on the one hand is kind of fascinating. And on the other hand, I think frightens a lot of parents. They're not really his friends. He's never met them.
Yeah, that I've heard so many times, and that really is unfair. Now, of course, the parents, they sound like adults, but, you need to monitor at some point what's going on there. But I don't think a child, many of the children these days, they don't need to meet the person on the other end of the game to feel like they're their friend.
Right.
Yeah. I think about even in today's day and age, we're bilocating business wise. I mean, I can imagine there's people listening who've never seen face-to-face their colleagues and they work with them all the time. We're in a very different world. And the question becomes is sort of, how does the parent help make sure the kids are safe? Because I think that's what most parents are worried about, and give the kids the freedom to be who they are and to have the relationships that they want to have, whether they're online or off.
Yeah.
I do think the key word is safe, and safety, psychic safety comes from limits, So we're talking about giving children freedom, but also they need limits, and they need to know that they're safe and their parents are keeping them safe. So it is an interesting dance a parent has to do. And like, where do I set limits? But I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think that there's this dance, right? And part of this is about engaging your kid to figure out what feels like realistic limits. They're going to say no limits, but if you give them a choice to say, okay, so we need to have something more than no limits, what might that look like?
And what will they say?
No, I think that's a good question. I mean, I think that's, if they say no limits, then you back off and you say, well, let's pick. Is it 2 hours a night? Is it 3 hours a night? What feels like a good choice?
It is a dance, right? How Runkle talks about teaching our kids to negotiate, and that it's actually our job as parents to teach our kids to negotiate, because if we don't, somebody else will. And you don't really want them learning it on the streets. You really want to help them learn how to negotiate responsibly, fairly, confidently, etc.
Well, I like that idea of just asking them, particularly older kids, what they think is appropriate. And often their answer is the answer. Holding them accountable to their own answer, I think is really
a whole other thing.
Another thing. But often what they come back with makes sense. Whether they stick with their own thing is another thing. But
we put a lot of emphasis on focusing on the process, right? So hold them accountable to what they committed to, not whether or not what they committed to was right.
Yeah, and that's teaching them to negotiate.
Yeah. So what else? Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners? Something you hope parents will take away from today?
I guess you're doing a fine job. I forget his name. Winnicott talked about the good enough parent, and this idea that, I think a lot of parents feel like they're not doing enough, or they're not doing, it's like innate, they're not doing enough, but if they just did this, if their child just did this, they would succeed and they'd feel better about themselves. And I think it starts with them fighting off the pressure from social media, parenting sites, and other friends who, like, the competition, that I think parents feel. Are they feeding their child the right thing? I don't know. I read on the social media, I read on Instagram, am I doing the right thing by giving them McDonald's? It seems a constant feeling that they're underperforming. Mm-hmm. And I think from that feeling of like, I'm not doing the right thing for my child comes these behaviors, kind of restrictions, the need for the child to master something. And so I think it all starts with that the parent just feels like they're doing fine and the kid's going to be fine. That's what I really tell parents. So like most of the kids are going to be fine. Now they're 8 or 12 and they're struggling, but I can see when they're 30, they're going to be fine. And that's what you have to hold in mind, that when your child's 30, it's going to be okay.
Well, and I guarantee that the parents that are listening to this podcast are absolutely the kind of parents that are doing not probably better than fine. They're probably doing great work.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Well, and what this is coming up for me as you're saying that, George, is, Diane and I have been working together since 2011. And early on, we started talking about what do we want for the parents in our community? And it was always calm and confidence.
Yeah.
We want you to feel calm and we want you to feel confident that it's okay. You got this, It's a simple but really powerful message.
I often think about the famous study where they took, like basically this idea that if you raised a child in a different home, that the child would turn out the same. Mm-hmm. Have you heard about these studies?
No, but I love it.
Or with twins where they were separated, but they developed really similarly in totally separate homes. And I think sometimes parents feel like they can really shape and influence a child. It's the nature versus nurture.
Nature, I was going to say nature versus nurture, right?
But I think a lot of it's nature. And sometimes I tell parents, your child is, cooked and cooling off on the top of the stove. You don't need to do anything else. Like they've absorbed all the love and lessons and they just need to be.
I love that. Well, so that's a great segue into our last question for you. Kind of a little fun wrap. Do you have a favorite quote or motto that you'd like to share?
In this context, I just think I like this phrase, the good enough parent, because the good enough parent is more than good enough. And if we hold on to this idea that you can be good enough and that's excellent, then I think it takes some of the pressure off parents.
I love that very much. We teach a strategy to parents called GMO, good enough, move on. So very much in line with our thinking. I think it's time to call this conversation a wrap. George, I want to say thank you so much for joining us and engaging in this thoughtful and really lovely conversation. Diane, anything we need to hit in terms of logistics?
I just want to wrap us with that whole, let's let our kids be. How do we focus as much energy on the goals and the objectives and the mastery as we are on letting them be kids? I love that.
Amen.
George, if people want to connect with you, what's the best way to make that happen?
Well, they can go to my website, sachscenter.com. That's SACHSCENTER.com. Or for adults with ADHD or parents with ADHD, we have this brand new mobile app called Inflow, and you can find that at getinflow.io or just Google or search for Inflow on the iPhone App Store. Awesome. Or Android App Store.
Take care, everybody. Talk to you next time.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.